Over the time span of June 5th and 6th of 2010, a significant tornado outbreak producing 53 tornadoes would rip through the Midwest and northeastern United States, the Great Lakes region, and some parts of Canada. Of the 53 total, 14 significant tornadoes and one violent tornado would touch down, each bringing destruction and despair to each of the areas affected. What caused this outbreak to make a name for itself is the violent tornado that touched down, that being an EF4 hitting a major portion of northwestern Ohio. In the late hours of June 5th, this monster carved a 14-kilometer long, 365-meter wide path of destruction through Wood and Ottawa counties, emotionally scarring the 173,000 people living in the area in just 14 short minutes. Producing maximum wind speeds of around 280 kilometers per hour, this made the tornado the third strongest one to hit Ohio in the 21st century and cementing itself as a powerhouse in the state's tornadic history. So today, we're going to talk about it. This is the 2010 Wood Ottawa EF4, better known as the Millbury tornado. I hope you enjoy. In the early afternoon of June 5th, the SPC would issue a Day 1 convective outlook as a low-pressure system moved across the central United States. The outlook, which was issued at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time, contained a tornado, damaging wind, and hail risk, something that is commonplace for convective outlooks on severe weather. The following is what it looked like. A 2% tornado risk was present across much of the Midwest and eastern United States, along with small portions of Colorado. In particular, the situation in Colorado was interesting, at least to me it was, because of the isolated nature of the risk. The reason for Colorado having an isolated 2% risk of tornadoes, and as we'll see later, a 5% risk of 1-inch hail, was because low-level moisture was increasing in an east-northeasterly upslope flow. This led to the prediction of isolated thunderstorms forming at higher elevations, along with the possibility of isolated supercells producing large hail or landspouts. Moving on, a 5% risk for tornadoes was present within the 2% risk in smaller areas, with notable states including Iowa, Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio in the Midwest, and New Hampshire, Vermont, and New York in the Northeast. Within the 5% risk in the Midwest, a 10% risk for tornadoes was also present, with southeastern Iowa, northeastern Missouri, central/northern Illinois and Indiana, and west/northwestern Ohio being the significant affected areas within this region. The damaging wind risk is all over the place visually, affecting multiple portions of the northern Midwest and the Deep South, as well as slamming the eastern Midwest, which isn't weird. Beginning in the northern Midwest, much of North Dakota, northern South Dakota, and north/northwestern Minnesota had a 5% risk for winds of 50 knots or greater. Moving slightly south, portions of Nebraska, Iowa, and Missouri had a risk ranging from 5 to 45% for winds of 50 knots or greater, and a 10% risk for winds of 65 knots or greater, indicated by the hatched region in light blue. In the Deep South and Southeast, eastern Louisiana, southeastern Mississippi, southwestern Alabama, and much of eastern Florida had a 5% risk for winds of 50 knots or greater. While these affected areas were significant in their own right, the juicy part of the wind risk came from the eastern Midwest to the northeast, where a 5 to 45% chance of 50-knot winds and a 10% chance of 65-knot winds were predicted from Illinois to as far north as Maine. In particular, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and Pennsylvania were the major states to be affected by the more probable and extreme wind risk. The hail risk was interesting, mainly because it sorta looked like a combination of the tornado and wind risks in terms of location. Like for example, the region of eastern Colorado that had a 2% risk of tornadoes also had a 5% risk of 1-inch hail or greater. The same could be said about the regions of North Dakota, South Dakota, and Minnesota that had a 5% risk of 50-knot winds or greater. A 5 to 15% risk of 1-inch hail or greater was present from the lower Midwest up to the Northeast. Interestingly, though, 3 states within the lower to eastern Midwest had a 30% risk of 1-inch hail or greater, with those states being southeastern Iowa, northeastern Missouri, and a decently large portion of Illinois. Tornadic activity leading up to the Wood, Ottawa tornado was heavy. However, around the time of touchdown, activity was coming to a close, as 29 of the 35 tornadoes from the 5th had touched down prior to the EF4, leaving only 5 tornadoes to go after this violent monster. Funnily enough, the first tornado to touch down in the entire outbreak was also the first one to touch down in Ohio as well, with that being an EF0 in Richland at 1:46 p.m. Eastern Time. After this touchdown, the first significant tornado wouldn't hit until 7 hours and 10 minutes after the Richland EF0, with that tornado being an EF2 in Elmwood, Illinois. Between the Elmwood EF2 and the Wood, Ottawa EF4, 7 significant tornadoes would touch down, with 5 of them being rated as an EF2 and 2 of them being rated as an EF3. By the time 11 p.m. Eastern Time had came and went, the situation in Ohio was dire, as of the 5 tornadoes that hit the state on the 5th, only 1 of them remained. And as we all know, the final one would be the apex of the outbreak, the Wood, Ottawa tornado. At 11:20 p.m. Eastern Time, the Wood, Ottawa tornado would touch down just east of Perrysburg along Oregon Road and just to the north of the Ohio Turnpike. It then began moving east-northeast at EF0 to EF1 strength, downing trees as it approached East Broadway Street and Moline. Once crossing the street, it entered Moline as an EF1 and intensified to an EF2 once in the area. Over 24 homes in a neighborhood along State Route 795 were heavily damaged or destroyed, with the worst of the damage taking place along Shawnee Avenue and Neal Avenue. The tornado then crossed State Route 795 and intensified to EF3 strength as it ripped through Moline-Martin Road. Here, several homes were destroyed, multiple trees were mowed down, and an 87-year-old man was severely injured. He would later succumb to his injuries, becoming one of 2 people to do so. After this, the tornado began approaching the Toledo Executive Airport, but before it did so, it went through a railroad yard, overturning a couple dozen railroad cars. Once reaching the airport, the tornado would hit the southern portion of Toledo Executive Grounds, destroying several large airplane hangars. About 85 meters south of the airport and slightly northwest of the Cummings Road State Route 795 intersection were the Lake Township Hall and the Lake Police Department. Both buildings were destroyed, especially the latter of the two. At the police station, cars were strewn about and mangled, at least 6 police vehicles were destroyed, and 1 emergency response vehicle was thrown around like a rag doll. In particular, one of the police vehicles was found wrapped around a large tree, and the emergency response vehicle was found destroyed over 305 meters from its original position. It would be at the police department that the first direct death would occur, and tragically, not the last. So what happened? A 20-year-old woman had left her vehicle along with her boyfriend and child to take cover in the police station. She would never make it, as tragically, she would be struck by flying debris from the tornado, causing her to lose her life. After hitting the Lake Police Station, Lake Township Hall, and the Toledo Executive Airport, the tornado would do extensive damage to an agricultural business and then hit the Lake Local School District. While Lake Elementary and Middle School would sustain significant roof damage, the school that would be hit the hardest was Lake High, as it took a direct hit. The gymnasium that the class of 2010 was supposed to graduate in the very next day had collapsed, and the cafeteria, auditorium, and a field house were also destroyed. Additionally, at least 8 school buses were severely damaged and overturned from the tornado. The tornado would continue moving parallel and slightly north of State Route 795 at EF3 intensity. As it did so, a 56-year-old woman would be driving along that route just past the Lake School District with her daughters following slightly behind. As the tornado was tossing debris all over the place, as they tend to do, unfortunately, the older woman would end up getting hit by some of the flying debris, which destroyed her car and took her life, making her the second direct death of this monster. The fate of the two daughters was far less grim, as despite their car being destroyed, they only sustained minor injuries. After this, the tornado would continue east-northeast for a bit before reaching Interstate 280 and eventually crossing it just north of the State Route 795 interchange. To give a little perspective on where we are in the tornado's lifespan at the moment, at this point, it has been traveling for about 6.6 kilometers and has been on the ground for roughly 6 minutes and 18 seconds based on its average forward speed in Wood County. After crossing Interstate 280, the tornado would travel for about 2.1 kilometers, first crossing Pemberville Road and then moving along an open field. While in the field, it would hit high-tension utility poles at low-end EF3 strength, knocking down at least one of them with wind speeds of roughly 227 kilometers per hour. Additionally, homes along Collins Road would also sustain significant damage while the tornado was in this area. As it reached the end of the field and approached Bradner Road, it briefly weakened to EF2 strength before intensifying back to an EF3 as it crossed the road and entered a neighborhood in southwest Millbury. The tornado would move along Bradner Road and Cherry Street, destroying several homes along the way and killing a 47-year-old man in one of them on Case Street, making this area the site of the third direct death of the storm thus far. After leaving Case Street, the tornado would show the community of Millbury what it was made of, as it would finally reach its peak intensity. As the Wood, Ottawa tornado approached Main Street, it would intensify to EF4 strength and immediately begin wreaking havoc on the residents. Along Main Street alone, over 12 homes were destroyed, with many being swept off their foundation, indicating that they were hit with wind speeds of roughly 274 to 282 kilometers per hour. The car damage was brutal, too, as many of them were destroyed or mangled, thrown around like toys, or both. Tragically, along this street, a 36-year-old woman and her 4-year-old son would be violently killed in one of the homes that was destroyed. The husband, aged 37, would be severely injured due to the tornado and would succumb to his injuries 7 days later on June 12th. This brought the direct death toll to 5 and the indirect death toll to 2, giving a total of 7 overall. Despite all of that, though, the tornado would continue pressing onwards, approaching Hill Drive and Woodville Road, and eventually heavily damaging or outright destroying several homes within that area. After the destruction done on those two roads, the tornado would cross North Fostoria Road, finally leaving both the Millbury community and Wood County as a whole, and arriving at its final target, Ottawa County. Looking at the timeline once more, at this point, the tornado had been traveling for just under 10.5 kilometers and had been on the ground for 10 minutes, meaning that this hellish nightmare was almost over for the residents affected, as merely a few minutes remained. At 11:30 p.m. Eastern Time, the tornado had officially entered Ottawa County as a low-end EF3. However, this wouldn't last long, as it would weaken to a high-end EF2 as it moved into Ottawa County onto West Trowbridge Road. While the tornado was there, it would heavily damage a couple of homes. Continuing in an east-northeast direction, it passed just north of the North Billman-West Trowbridge intersection, where the tornado would significantly damage a few more homes. After crossing North Billman Road, the tornado made a right turn and intensified for the last time to EF3 strength as it approached North Ryman Road. Now moving in a southeasterly direction and approaching just south of the North Ryman-West Trowbridge intersection, the tornado would damage about a dozen homes within the area. It would then cross Ryman Road, as well as weakening for the last time to EF1 strength. After traveling for a brief period, the Wood-Ottawa tornado would finally dissipate just west of North Ballander Road at 11:34 p.m. Eastern Time, being on the ground for about 3.7 kilometers in total for Ottawa County. At last, people could take a breath of fresh air and relax for just a moment, as their worst fear was finally gone. The impact that the Wood, Ottawa tornado left was devastating. Cars mangled, houses reduced to rubble, people dead, and graphic injuries from the survivors. When everything was said and done, the tornado was on the ground for 14 minutes, traveled for 14.16 kilometers, attained a peak diameter of over 365 meters, moved at an average forward speed of 60.7 kilometers per hour, and produced maximum wind speeds of 274 to 282 kilometers per hour, giving a final rating of EF4. When it came to the overall casualties and the financial losses, 28 people were injured, 7 people were killed, and $102.4 million in damages were produced, equivalent to $146.7 million in 2024. While the overall statistics for the tornado are interesting in their own right, so are the individual county statistics, so let's talk about them. In Wood County, the tornado was on the ground for 10 minutes, traveled for a little under 10.5 kilometers, attained a peak diameter of over 365 meters, moved at an average forward speed of about 62.8 kilometers per hour, and produced maximum wind speeds of up to 282 kilometers per hour, giving a maximum rating of EF4 for the county. When it came to casualties, 26 people were injured, with at least 17 of them having to be transported to Toledo for hospitalization, and 7 people died, with 5 direct deaths and 2 indirect. When it came to damage produced, Wood County suffered $5 million of damages to its infrastructure and tens of millions to the Lake School District. Additionally, dozens of homes would sustain minor damage, over 60 homes were heavily damaged or destroyed, dozens of vehicles were destroyed, and hundreds of trees were either toppled or snapped, with many of the larger ones being debarked. Debris from the tornado was everywhere, too. Some of it was found dozens of kilometers away, with small amounts being found on some of the islands in western Lake Erie. Remember the high-tension utility poles that were hit in the open field past Pemberville Avenue? The collapse of them would cause widespread power outages within a large area, specifically across Millbury and Walbridge. Moving on to Ottawa County, the tornado was on the ground for 4 minutes before eventually dissipating, traveled for 3.7 kilometers, attained a peak diameter of almost 183 meters, and produced maximum wind speeds of at least 218 kilometers per hour, giving a maximum rating of EF3 for the county. The average forward speed for the tornado in Ottawa County was 55.5 kilometers per hour, indicating that it was moving slower in the second leg of the event compared to the first leg. When it came to casualties, only 2 people were injured and no people were killed, indicating that all of the deaths that occurred were in Wood County. The damage produced in Ottawa County in terms of finances isn't clear, but what is clear is that around 20 homes sustained minor damage, 14 homes suffered major damage, and 11 homes were outright destroyed. While the ferocity of the tornado in Ottawa County was significantly lower than what was seen in Wood County, that will never take away the fact that the storm decimated both areas in their own right. In the late night hours of June 5, 2010, a violent low-end EF4 tornado would rip through Wood and Ottawa counties, hitting Millbury the hardest. For 14 agonizing minutes across 14.1 kilometers, the tornado would raise hell on the communities affected and take the lives of several people. The tornado produced maximum wind speeds of up to 282 kilometers per hour, cementing itself as a demon in Ohio's tornadic history. It became the second strongest tornado of 2010 alongside the Tyler Doran EF4, as well as becoming the third strongest Ohio tornado in the 21st century, only being outclassed by the 2000 Xenia F4 and the 2002 Van Wert Roselms F4, both of which had produced maximum wind speeds of at least 333 kilometers per hour. Despite how powerful this tornado was, it's very much overshadowed and under-discussed in the modern day because of storms such as the 2019 Dayton EF4, and I hope that with this video, that this could change a little bit, as it absolutely deserves people talking about it. This was a deep dive into the 2010 Wood Ottawa EF4, better known as the Millbury tornado. Thank you for watching.